Hello, ladies and gentlemen. The 27th of January 2024 marked 79 years to the liberation of Auschwitz. 79 years have passed since the gravest chapter, not only in Jewish history, but in the history of mankind, has come to its tragic end, in which the lives of 6 million Jewish men, women, children, and elderly were forever lost because of one reason alone. They were Jews. 79 years ago, they were murdered by the Germans and their accomplices across Europe as part of the so-called final solution, the German Nazi grand plan to which there was no precedent in human history, to annihilate every single Jew. The 27th of January is commemorated each year by the international community and, of course, by Israel as well. However, this year signifies a special and even greater difficulty to address the topic after the vicious and barbaric massacre of 1,200 Jewish Israeli men, women, children, and elderly on the 7th of October by Hamas terrorists. 75 years after the establishment of the State of Israel, the national home of all Jews around the world, Jews were slaughtered, raped, beheaded, burned alive, and even taken hostage from their own homes. On October 2023, Jewish lives, once again, were in danger, this time on Israeli soil. How to address the issue of Holocaust memory and commemoration 79 years after the Holocaust in the shadow of the massacre of October 7th by Hamas? Where do these two tragic, traumatic historical events in Jewish history meet, and where do they differ? Why is it so important to see and acknowledge the differences between the events and to be aware of dangerous comparisons? Above all, what effect did the events of October 7th have on the identity of Jews around the world? How do we understand ourselves today, 79 years after the Holocaust, and 4 months after the massacre of October 7th? I'm Adi Kantor, and in order to discuss these questions in depth, I'm honored to have next to me in the INSS studio today Dr. Yonker, senior researcher at the Center for the Study of European Contemporary Jewry and a lecturer in the Department of Arabic and Islamic Studies at Tel Aviv University. He holds a PhD in Middle East history and is the author of The Rise and Fall of Greater Syria, published in 2021. A warm welcome to you, Carl, and thank you very much for joining me in this very important talk today.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
So, Carl, how to begin even this talk? How do we address, as researchers of Holocaust, of anti-Semitism, the 27th of January, the liberation of Auschwitz, commemorating 79 years to the liberation of the biggest death and concentration camp, 4 months after October 7th? Maybe we will begin with how to begin.
I think with how to begin, we need to make an important distinction. One is when we talk about the 27th of January and International Holocaust Memorial Day, we're talking about something that happened in the past, in our historical memory. Mm-hmm. We're dealing with it as a memory. When we talk about October 7th, you and I who live here, we're dealing with it as a living trauma. Mm-hmm. It's not a memory yet. And I think as researchers, we're approaching now, I think, the historical memory of the liberation of Auschwitz and the Holocaust in a way that didn't exist before, because we're living in that trauma. We've seen extreme violence, mm-hmm. extreme evil, meted out and filmed with absolute glee and without shame, in a way that we've never seen before, at least targeting the Jewish community. We didn't see this even with old films from the Holocaust. As methodical as the Holocaust was with Germany, you don't see the same
the acts.
You know the acts. You hear about the acts. You read about the acts. They're documented. Right. I was just in Lithuania and mm-hmm. Latvia this past summer, and you see the documentation. Mm-hmm. That Jewish individuals, families, entire families were taken out into the forests and slaughtered. And you know that, but usually there was no one filming it.
Correct. Yeah.
And so you don't have that same visceral connection, that same visual connection to it.
Yeah, and yet there are too many people around the world who have maybe have seen these footages, these horrible footages of the GoPro cameras of Hamas terrorists, and still deny the events. And I think I mentioned in my introduction the similarities and differences between these two events. And I think it's very important to acknowledge where do they differ and where are they similar. And there are similarities with regards to the barbarism, how barbaric the actions were, the slaughtering, the beheading, and the burning alive of Jewish victims 4 months ago here on Israeli soil by Hamas terrorists. Murder is murder. But there are differences. But I think the denying of it, seeing the actual facts, denying the facts. This we see also in the Holocaust memory. Working, you and I, researchers of Holocaust, of anti-Semitism, we know how hard it is to fight anti-Semitism, to fight Holocaust denial.
Right.
If there's something that is very important to discuss, on the 27th of January, is the denying of the how much is it widespread in social media. Social media is one of the it has become a crime scene. Yeah. Of people saying whatever is on their mind. It has nothing to do with facts, nothing to do with historical facts, and it spreads so fast, and people believe it. So what do you think is the role of facts and truth today, 79 years after the Holocaust and 4 months after October 7th?
I think for us as researchers, our job is to bring the facts. Regardless of any response or pushback that might come from that, our job is to look at these incidents, whether in making a historical comparison or not. And we all know that there's big issues with making historical analogies. We need to do this. But we can't do it in a broad way, because at the end of the day, if we can't compare anything to history, we can't learn from it. So there's no point for me as a historian to do my job.
Yeah, because when we compare, we understand why the events were so unique.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, I think we also need to make a distinction between there are comparisons that are made for the purpose of setting a narrative that the government will set or that develop right away, and there's narratives that are set to make people attach onto it or feel something, an emotional reaction, or at least have some sort of comprehension. So, the comparison with the Islamic State. On one level, it makes perfect sense in terms of if we're talking to about the brutality, the ruthlessness, those types of things, and targeting of civilians, those types of things, absolutely. But then if you start get into the nitpicky details of ideology and programs and things like that, of course there's differences between Hamas and ISIS. The problem also then becomes what in the popular discourse is that those differences are used to dismiss any comparison whatsoever. And I think that's one of the problems that we have here. It's not only that there's a denial of basic facts, which you can see on videos, on film, whatever, pictures. Yeah,
the crimes are documented.
The crimes are documented
by the perpetrators themselves.
But there's not even an acknowledgement that even a historical comparison of any sort in our public discourse today is legitimate. If there's this absurd debate about whether the beheadings actually took place. Well, and then it's this, you have far right people in the U.S. and others going, well, the beheadings only took place after the person was dead. This is an absurd. Yeah,
I don't have the words even to describe what I think about this. Yeah,
but these are things that we have a responsibility to keep presenting facts, to keep making our arguments, presenting the public with our research, which is sound, and hoping that makes an impact in the places where it needs to make an impact.
So that just to clarify, maybe make a bit of order in this chaos, I think, in the media, comparing Holocaust and 7th of October. Where do these two events differ? And they differ concerning the crimes, concerning the magnitude of the crimes, in your view.
That's a very difficult question, because at the end of the day, Hamas has a program that wants to see Jews eliminated. The annihilation of Jews. Yeah. Now, is it done in a systematic fashion?
Industrial
fashion? No. But we also have to remember the the beginnings of the Holocaust were not done in an industrial fashion.
Mm-hmm.
It started off with these mass killings, shootings, things like that.
In the forests.
In the forests. Now, I think that's where there needs to be a distinction, that there is this ideological aspect of it, that there's a similarity, but I don't think Hamas has a program or even envisions a program of systematically annihilating the Jewish people. Now,
and this was the plan of the so-called final solution to annihilate every Jew on earth. Yeah.
Again, but then you have to ask yourself, what does it mean? What's the end goal of from the river to the sea? What's the end goal of the charter of pushing the Jews out of what they consider historical Palestine? The end goal is there. So we can debate on, what means that they might apply. But again, right now there's not this systematic industrial scale plan. But at the end of the day, maybe it doesn't matter.
And I think another big difference is that the fact that there was no state of Israel at that time, in the 30s and 40s, there was no national home for the Jewish people. I think that's a massive difference. Yeah. And now that the Jews do have the state of Israel, and I think that what was so traumatic about what happened 4 months ago is the fact that it happened here. It didn't happen. It happened here, and it has an effect. Of course, it affects all Jewish communities around the world. What happens in Israel affects them as well. They are Jews in the world that were in danger before, but I think since the 7th of October, a lot more. Maybe this is now the time maybe to dive a bit into the research and into your annual reporting what you've seen. This is the place to say, the time and place to say that your center, of course, publishes every year annual reports dealing with both the negative situation in which Jews are in, if it's anti-Semitic attacks, but also positive aspects of how, of solidarity towards Jews. And I would be very interested to know really what you've seen in your study in the past 4 months, maybe to talk a bit about the positive aspects for a righteous cause. This is the way. This is the name of the study that you just published in the center. Yeah. What do you see there? What did you see there happening since October 7th?
I think when we talk about anti-Semitism and everything, that what we wanted to do with this report, and now it's our 3rd annual report, is really highlight the efforts of people, individuals, governments, non-governmental organizations that are trying to make a difference, that are fighting the good fight, giving of themselves, of their time, of their money, of everything that they have to make a difference, to push back against this hate and manifestations of this hate. And unfortunately, in our world, good news isn't news, and so we want to draw attention to it because they deserve to be recognized, and hopefully they deserve to be emulated as well. And I think this is how we make a difference. So when we talk about after October 7th in particular, there was a tremendous amount of acts of solidarity, of acts of humanity, simple, basic humanity, of going out and demonstrating, of in the streets of Berlin, of London, of the United States, and sometimes we get lost in the other protests that happened where there were calls, in Australia to gas the Jews, and these are all bad things, but we need to see the positive in the Czech Republic. Governments like the Czech Republic were at the forefront. Germany was at the forefront.
Germany, of course.
And the United States, of course, of taking a firm, clear stand that this was an act of terror. We stand with Israel, and we will not condone blowback on our Jewish communities at home. That this connection between what happens in Israel and what happens to the Jewish community, our own Jewish communities abroad, is not acceptable. And this is anti-Semitic. Yeah, sure. When you equate Jews and Israel and Jews, that this plays into this old anti-Semitic trope. Clear. So these acts of solidarity were numerous. It's
Bulgaria. You mentioned the restoration of synagogues.
Yeah, and these are there's aspects of education, Holocaust education in Norway. There's a wonderful program called Pathfinders, where young Norwegian Jews go into classrooms and talk about being Jewish in Norway. and what it is like to be Jewish in Norway. And most Norwegians don't understand that or even know that there's a Jewish community. So there's a huge aspect of
I'm not sure how many Jews they've met in their lives.
Exactly. And, there's an opportunity there to say that there is a Jewish community. We're here in Norway. We are Norwegian. We're just like you. And to familiarize and to just pass this knowledge on, because a lot of times when we've been researching this, and also when others have been researching for us, you get this common statement of, I simply didn't know. And so there is this knowledge gap. And I think it gets back to our original conversation that there's a knowledge gap that we have a job to try to fill, no matter what the response is. So there's the education aspect. And then there's the restoration aspect of places like the synagogue in Vidin and elsewhere, which these synagogues are restored to their previous glory, but not always in a way that is to continue Jewish life, because Jewish life in these places has almost ceased to exist. But for Vidin and the municipality there, the Jewish past is a key part of its history, and it wants to promote itself as this meeting place of three religions, of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam.
Because they understand that the Jews, you were referring now to the Czech Republic or Norway?
Yeah.
They understood that, and I think this happens also in Germany. I'm a researcher of Germany, and I see it also there. They understand that German Jews or Norwegian Jews were a central part of society. It has to do with the code of the society itself. And therefore the understanding of learning about Jewish history is learning about themselves.
Right.
Even though they're not Jews, but learning Jewish history is understanding their own national history.
The history of Vidin without the Jewish component is not the same history.
Exactly.
When I was in Vilna or in Riga,
a key understanding.
Vilna, Riga, I was just in Saloniki. If you don't understand the Jewish history there, that started well before the Holocaust, and again, this, to make this point, Jewish history didn't start with the Holocaust, and it didn't end with the Holocaust. There's a rich history that needs to be explored and taught and shown, not just to European students or American students, but Israeli students as well.
Sure.
Because a lot of these places, the history is intertwined. Baghdad, Damascus, Aleppo, you name it. There's these places.
You just mentioned the, teaching about the Holocaust, and we're talking about education, Holocaust memory, commemoration, 27th of January. Going back to Israel and to the Israeli education system, the Minister of Education just recently made a decision to withdraw, to not include the Holocaust as a subject in the matriculation exams of this year, due to the events of October 7th. What is your stand on this issue?
I think it's a very smart decision, and I think it's a compassionate decision. To understand where we are, that we're living in a trauma. We're still trying to address it, and we're adults. The difference in trying to explain that trauma to my 8-year-old son, as opposed to an 18-year-old, these gaps exist, and at the end of the day, we have to be concerned about the well-being of the youths here. And the Minister of Education, at the end of the day, took the recommendation of experts. That experts were saying
this came from an
expert panel, expert recommendation of going, we think that this is the best course of action for this year.
It needs to be said that this is a temporary decision only for this year. It goes back, of course, to the curricula next year. The question is, I think I'm just going to broaden a bit the discussion about this, not necessarily this year, but can we take a subject like Holocaust, because of what the Israeli society, with focusing on the youth of the Israeli society, went through this year, is it wise to take such a subject out of the curricula when we try to, because they will address it anyway if it's this year or next year, and they probably know or heard of the Holocaust, and maybe through teaching, maybe we need to ask ourselves to change the way we teach, not to not include, but to change the way we teach.
I think
And not in a traumatic way,
Right.
not to traumatize the children, but to somehow connect them to the subject, not with the right tools. And I'm not sure that has been done until now in the education system.
I think one of the things that's happened with October 7th, and again I'll go even broader now, is that there's been a lot of questions that need to be asked. Since we started publishing this report 3 years ago, one of the main things that we've said is that we need to critically look at ourselves and the people involved in the fight against anti-Semitism and Holocaust education, et cetera, need to critically assess whether we're being effective. And I think this question just became more acute.
What does it mean to be
October
effective
7th.
in Holocaust education?
Again, but that's the good. What are the metrics?
What do we want them to know?
It's not necessarily I'm not coming here saying that X should be X, Y, and Z, but with anything, with the national action plans, with passing legislation, with anything, education-wise, what are the metrics of success?
Yeah. How is success defined in Holocaust education?
What is success defined? Because
maybe knowing the facts.
Yeah, and then
first of all, knowing what Nazism was.
And
what is a Nazi? What is the Nazis were Germans, or to.
I remember
basic facts.
Yeah, I remember in one of my master's classes, a professor of mine said, you don't get extra credit for knowing the facts, dates and times and names. These are the basic fundamental things, and there's nothing wrong with memorizing these facts and having a set basic set of understanding. Because if you don't have this basic understanding, this foundation of knowledge. You can't
the whole house
has fallen,
built really bad.
So we see also now that there's a lack of fundamental understanding of basic knowledge of the Holocaust.
Comparing national, by the way, not just by the children studying in the education system. We hear it in by the ministers.
Yes.
We hear it also by our prime minister, comparing perpetrators to perpetrators.
Yeah.
There's no questioning that we're talking about murderers here.
Right.
But comparing National Socialism to other kinds of perpetration. We need some order here, I think.
Yeah,
we need some order with the facts.
Yeah, you need some order with the facts, and we need a common. And this is what's been breaking down in societies. Again, not just limited to Holocaust education, but in societies in general. That if you look at America and elsewhere, there's this basic, fundamental separation on the basics of facts. If there's, we'll go to the election of 2020. If there's a segment of the population that does not believe or think that Joe Biden actually won the election, there's a separation.
This is what populism means, I feel, therefore I think. This is the role of emotions. The emotions control everything, and not knowledge or thinking or rational thinking. Definitely a problem. You said before that we're not asking the right. What does it mean to ask the right questions with regards to Holocaust memory, and how to educate and how to teach our children to ask the right questions? What are the right questions? And I'm now asking you on a different level the same question in a way. Since October 7th, you were a researcher. Have you been asking yourself new set of questions that were not there before? When you look at the study of anti-Semitism, Jew hatred, what have we not asked enough or not loud enough that is now clear after October 7th as researchers?
In my view, I think we were all shocked by just the level of hatred that has manifested itself in increased physical assaults, increased threats. We always knew that there was this connection, that if something happened in Israel, there was usually going to be some sort of
saw the rise after
some sort of rise that we saw it in May 2021. And we also know that there's certain trigger events that can lead to a rise in the number of incidents. We know this, but I think we were all taken aback by just the amount,
the magnitude
of it, exactly. And I think that caused, at least in me, a moment of introspection of going, okay, what needs to change? Because again, we've had all these programs, we've had legislation, we've had
annual reports.
There's millions and millions of dollars thrown at this problem, with complete justification. And there's also good people, like I said before, fighting the good fight and pouring themselves into this. And now you're going, what was it all for?
That's a hard moment.
It's a very hard moment for a researcher. Yeah. But again, at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves the same questions again, but be critical about it. How are we measuring success, or how do we define success?
Exactly.
What are the metrics? What are the objectives?
And always, and I'll add to this, maybe always to keep in mind that, we're dealing with theories all the time, theories of anti-Semitism, new anti-Semitism, classical anti-Semitism. We put them all the time in framework, in the frame, in theory. Yeah. And we always, I think, as researchers, need to remind ourselves that maybe we're wrong. And what if we're wrong? What if the glasses that we put on as researchers, maybe they're not clean enough? Maybe there's something we haven't cleaned there yet, and we need to clean a bit more and see a bigger picture or a more complicated picture. And I'll give you an example. Because I, for example, I'm researching right-wing extremism for many, many years, and what I've seen since the 7th of October is the coming together of extreme right-wing, extremism from the right, extremism from the left, Islam fundamental. They're all marching in the same demonstration. And maybe what we take of it is that anti-Semitism has nothing to do with left or right. Maybe it's not even a political issue. It has been politicized. That we know that there's the phenomenon of politicization of anti-Semitism, that every side takes the term and uses it for its own interests. But we do see after the 7th of October is the coming together of what used to be margins, but now it's totally in the mainstream. They're coming more and more into the extreme worldviews, ideologies enter the mainstream. It's in the center. It's not. I as a researcher, I'm not looking in the margins anymore. They're not there. Yeah. We need to ask ourselves maybe also questions that not necessarily have to do with the extreme theories, but more with the center of the society. Right. How did it happen to the mainstream that the extremists were able to enter it so easily in the last years? And we saw the explosion on October 7th. We saw what happened on the streets. They're all marching together. Is it really about right or left wing politics?
I think this is, again, sometimes the question that you ask defines kind of the boundaries of where you end up, for better or worse. And so when we start with this framework of left, right, or put it into political categories, we can end up, not predetermining, but you get a conception of this is. And that's exactly what brought us
to the 7th of October, and that's why we need to be really, really careful.
And then you get into the other questions or issues of politicization. Just taking the United States as an example. Yeah, it's very easy for, say, the Republican Party to go after Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and others on the left, whether you call them on the progressive left or even in the Democratic Party, and use it as a tool of going, well, we don't have a problem, they have the problem.
They don't look inside.
You don't look inside. And then the Democrats will shoot back, well, you have all these, the Christian nationalists, you have all the neo-Nazis and white nationalists, but then you also have the people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and other kind of populist right-wing politicians and figures so you don't look at yourself. So again, I think it gets back to asking maybe the same question, but maybe a different framework.
Interesting.
And maybe getting out of
be
outside
open enough
of this
to
be open
self-criticism.
And again, when you do the research, you can't control how someone is gonna perceive it. But at the end of the day, maybe it's not best to look at the political categories of left and right, but that's the question that you're asking. So maybe ask a different question, getting back to the mainstream, or talking about Americans or Germans in general, and just
the study of the mainstream,
trying to
and not
figure
just
out,
the extremists.
the study of the mainstream.
Yeah.
Because why are these messages resonating now? Why do they find an audience?
And
when they were previously on the fringe, or why are they even tolerated?
Why
more
is it
in the
happening
mainstream?
now? Yeah, I think these are the questions as researchers, as historians, we always why now?
Right.
What happened now that allowed it to happen? Just to conclude, we're commemorating the Holocaust, 27th of January. In the end, we came together to commemorate this event. These are the same questions that we need to ask also with regards to Holocaust history, to Holocaust studies. There is perpetrator research focusing only on the perpetrators and understanding the ideology, how important ideology is. I think that's another take that we need to have from all of these historical events. Ideology is important. We need to analyze it. We need to understand what effect it has on minds of people that are, ideology controls them. And they don't see beyond it. It happened also in Nazi Germany. Ideology was totally there. But there was also before, there was a whole history before the 30th of January 33, the taking over of power by the Nazi party. We need to ask ourselves for more than 12 years, until 33, there was a Nazi party, and they went more and more into the mainstream. The German society, they came to power on the 30th of January 33, but they were there long before. They were everywhere. And we need to ask the right questions about the German society of those times. The German society during the Weimar Republic, not just about the NSDAP. To understand what happened in 1933, we need to understand what happened prior to that in the society itself. What made people, for example, we know that they were not elected by the majority of Germans. This happened only later. There was a coalition, we know, but it was a process. It didn't happen overnight. They didn't have majority. The majority of Germans were not NSDAP in 1933. They were later, but not in 1933. So we need to ask what happens in societies who were once democratic.
Right.
That is so appealing in extremist parties. Why is there, why is the mainstream society so weak when they come together with them? The weakness of society. I think this is something very important that we need to address more.
Yeah, we need to look at these interactions of multiple factors and how they lead to a place. And at the end of the day, I think again in our world, a lot of people are looking for simple answers, and there aren't simple answers. And especially when dealing with history, it's complicated and it's complex. And I think, just as another example that, from this summer in Vilna, you see what Jewish life was like there. And you see that Vilna wouldn't have existed in the same way
without them.
And you know that when you're there now, that there's a there's a profound sense of loss, at least that you feel. A void.
Yeah.
And then I visited the KGB, one of the KGB museums, which was in their old police station. But there you understand the complexity of life. That in the Lithuanian, context, and also elsewhere in the Baltics and in Eastern Europe, you had, Soviet occupation, went to German occupation, went back to Soviet occupation. Yeah. And that there were heroes that turned into villains and back into heroes. Bystanders who, it's complex. And the only way that you can address this complexity is if you are honest and deal with it. And it's difficult and it's not easy, but this is what has to be done.
I fully agree. And this is how we need to educate also.
Exactly.
The children. Yeah, to ask questions. Never be afraid of questions. Be afraid of the answers, not of the questions. Dr. Karl Yonker, thank you so much for joining me today and discussing really such a difficult subject, Holocaust memory, the massacre of 7th of October, how to discuss them in one meeting. Hard.
Yes.
Thank you so much, and thank you for our audience for tuning in, and see you in the next program. Goodbye.